And a short time ago, I was joined by Andrew Wilkie in Canberra and the President of the National Farmers Federation, Jock Laurie, in Tamworth in regional New South Wales. Jock Laurie, let me start with you. Andrew Wilkie wants all cattle exports to Indonesia banned immediately, with all live animal exports phased out within the next 3 years. What would be the effect of that?
Oh, look, I think the northern part of Australia would really come into great difficulty when it comes to cattle production. The system is very suited to going to Indonesia. It is certainly not suited to travelling long distances to abattoirs outside those areas. And it would cause some major concerns up in that area. I mean, it's an industry that's very much developed over the last 15 to 20 years and has been progressively over that period of time really dealing with a lot of the welfare issues right from port all the way through to the feedlots at the other end and through to the abattoirs. But unfortunately, there's been a bit of a hiccup in the system just recently.
Andrew Wilkie, what do you say to Mr Laurie's points?
Oh, look, I think the issue about job losses and the economic impact of these reforms are being quite overstated. The fact is we've got a mothballed abattoir in Katherine, a mothballed abattoir in Innisfail. There's at least one large player in the industry looking to establish an abattoir in Darwin. There are clearly opportunities for those cattle to be processed in Australia. And I would make a very important additional point, Lee, is that the live export trade is in fact cannibalising the processing industry in Australia, because the fact is when you put beasts on a ship, you send them overseas, you're effectively sending the processing jobs overseas.
Jock Laurie, are you overstating the case? And what about these points Andrew Wilkie makes about the possibility of cattle being processed in Australia?
It's certainly not overstating the case. I think the processing works that have been in northern Queensland, and a couple of conversations I've had today with people up through there, I mean, they were in serious trouble and folded long before the international trade to Indonesia started. So the problem is it's a very seasonal slaughter up there. In order to invest money in an abattoir, then you need to be able to kill nearly every day of the year to make them pay. And if you just turn around and you can only operate through the wet or through the dry season, it makes it very difficult. Now, it is an issue. There's been a problem over the years in the systems up there about what market they're trying to get into, and certainly if they come back down south, the capacity to be able to put the cattle into the right weight ranges to bring them down south, and then to get them into those markets, and simply the transport to get them down to the works that are there. Now, if you open up other works up in northern Queensland, you'll run into the same problems that the works had before, and if they were profitable then, they'd still be operating right now.
Mr Laurie, does the Farmers Federation concede, though, that given what we've seen about what's going on in Indonesia, that it does warrant some very serious action?
No doubt. Look, the industry as a whole has been, taken back by what they've seen. There's no doubt about that. And we've got many producers in Northern Australia at the moment that are really sitting down questioning where their cattle are going to and making some judgments and making some calls about whether they'll send cattle or not based on the fact that of the footage they've seen. So they are making, every post they're turning now, it is to make sure that the welfare of those stock, the stock of their properties, the stock of the properties that they've actually spent a fair bit of time growing and producing, will be well looked after right through to the point of slaughter. And the industry as a whole is extremely concerned about that and is absolutely clear on making sure that we get that right.
Andrew Wilkie, do you trust the industry to lead the way on that?
Well, I trust many people in the industry, and in fact my office has now received thousands of emails in the last week, many of which have come from farmers and so on who are appalled at this sort of treatment. But the fact is there are others in the industry who clearly cannot be trusted. We know for a fact that the industry has put over 100 of these slaughter boxes into Indonesian abattoirs over the last 8 years. And for the whole of that 8 years, there have been people in the industry who have been well aware of the cruel treatment of Australian livestock in Indonesia. And mind you, the problem is broader than just Indonesia. In the last 8 years, we've had also something like 8 different countries in the Middle East singled out for problems with our live export trade. I think we've had so many episodes over so many years in so many countries. It's clear that the system is broken, that there are some in the industry cannot be trusted. Frankly, some in previous governments, this government and previous governments, have failed in their oversight. You can't trust the Indonesian authorities. They don't even have effective laws to protect animals, so we certainly can't put the responsibility on their shoulders. I think stop exporting the cattle, process them in Australia, which will be more humane for the animals and create jobs for Australian workers.
Mr Laurie, what do you say to what Mr Wilkie says there about the fact that there have been similar revelations about these sort of practices elsewhere overseas in the past? The fact that people in the industry were aware of what was going on in Indonesia, what do you say to those things?
Well, I'm not sure that people in the industry were aware of what was going on in Indonesia at all. I think there has been a tremendous amount of work done up there over the years. The boxes, when they are operated properly, certainly operate to the international standard, and I think that needs to be recognised. I think the industry itself has been continually and progressively working in a difficult environment to pick up animal welfare standards, and I think they've been dealing with that in a very sensitive manner. But at the same time, they will continue to develop and continue to evolve. The stunning and the introduction of stunning has been a gradual uptake recently, and obviously needs to be picked up a hell of a lot more than it is now and into the future. And obviously the industry needs to continue to work with that. Now, I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that anybody in the industry was well aware of it, because I don't believe that's the case. As a matter of fact, when many people have been up to Indonesia and they're coming back and they're saying that they certainly didn't see anything like that when they were up there. So, I mean, that's all I can say, and I trust the people in the industry to be honest about that.
But given the Australian involvement up there, doesn't that itself, if what you say is correct, that people weren't aware of the scale of it, doesn't that itself show a failure of moral leadership?
Not necessarily. I think when you're dealing with so many abattoirs up there and you're putting in the boxes and you're making sure that the processes are right, and then to turn around and have things happen when these people aren't there, it makes it very difficult. So obviously what we've got to do is make sure that we put things in place that do overcome that problem. And that's why the industry is looking seriously at the 25 abattoirs that meet that international standard, about putting Australian people in those abattoirs to make sure that the welfare through to the point of slaughter is carried out in a fashion that Australians see as being fair and reasonable. But then having independent oversight over that to make sure that there can't be any confusion about what's actually being done or what's said that is going to be done. So, you know, the industry is absolutely genuine about getting this right. We don't like seeing footage like that. People in the industry get very distressed like that, and Andrew's dead right. People in the industry do get very stressed by that because they spend all their time working and living with animals, and they certainly don't approve of that. But there are the sensitivities, the political sensitivities and the religious sensitivities that the industry also needs to deal with.
Andrew Wilkie, do you accept that over time the Australian industry has made efforts in Indonesia to improve the practices there, and do you believe that the industry's done enough?
Well, I do acknowledge that for about a decade now, the Australian industry has had people on the ground in Indonesia providing training and other forms of assistance and installing these Mark I boxes, which are at the heart of the problem. And the fact is that after a decade of assistance with people on the ground, we have that extraordinary footage we saw in Four Corners just a week ago, showing that after a decade of assistance, things have not improved, and that we have a serious problem there. And it's worth noting that those slaughterhouses that Four Corners and Animals Australia have visited, they were picked randomly. They were just 11 that they knew where they were and they got to. We have no idea what the circumstances are in the other 90 or over 100, whatever it might be. It's about 100 all up, but over 100. For all we know, the 50 worst slaughterhouses are still out there and haven't been found yet. You know, there is clearly a need to bring in a moratorium tonight on the shipping and the processing of Australian cattle in Indonesia. That will give us the breathing space to look afresh at what's going on there, for government officials to visit Indonesia, and for us then to start looking afresh at improving the processes in Indonesia, so that over the next few years, before we wind up the industry, Australian stock can be treated more humanely.
We'll leave it there. Jock Laurie and Andrew Wilkie, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Jock.